Okay, we're going to talk about Chapter 3, Cognitive Development in Infancy and Toddlerhood. Behaviorism is the scientific study of observable behavior. So learning is defined by behaviorists as a relatively permanent change in behavior. When you change your behavior, you've learned something. This is the way behaviorists like B.F. Skinner think about learning. Learning is a change in behavior, okay? So they call that conditioning. And there are two types of conditioning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical is involuntary responses and operant is voluntary behavior. So we're going to talk about this, and I'm actually, I think, going to show you a little video to help you understand this a little bit more.
Classical conditioning is a way of learning where a stimulus that triggers a biological response is paired with a new stimulus that then results in the same reaction. The most famous work in classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. One day during his research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs began to salivate in the presence of the technician who normally fed them. He wondered if the technician was a trigger that stimulated a response associated with food. To find out, he constructed an experiment that would allow him to measure a dog's output of saliva. First, he served the dog food. Then, he served food while playing the sounds of a metronome and repeated the process a few times. Finally, he removed the food and only played the metronome. The dogs began to salivate in response to the metronome alone. Pavlov concluded that if a new stimulus was present when the dog was given food, then that stimulus became associated with food and caused salivation on its own. When he published his findings, Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response. He also reported that 1. Learning occurred most rapidly when the interval between the sound and the appearance of the food was short. 2. The saliva produced by the sound differed in composition from that produced by the food, which means that the conditioned response was not an exact replica of the unconditioned response. 3. While there are several forms of conditioning, such as forward and backward conditioning, classical conditioning cannot create new behavior or be used for training, but instead triggers involuntary biological responses. 4. We can almost entirely undo the conditioning. This happens through extinction, when we repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. So, what occurs inside the brain? When a dog sees the food, the signals from the eyes and nose stimulate the brain, which activates the salivation glands to secrete saliva to aid the dog with the digestion. When a dog hears a sound, the ears send a signal to the brain, which takes note but has no reason to activate anything. When the two different neurological processes are being activated simultaneously, new synaptic connections occur between the auditory stimulus and the behavioral response. Over time, these synapses are strengthened so that it only takes the sound to activate the pathway leading to salivation. You can try this popular classroom exercise. Take a friend, sit down and relax for 2 minutes. Then allow your partner to check and record your pulse rate. Your partner will then tap a pencil on the desk 5 times. Right after, stand up and hop on one leg for 30 seconds and then check your pulse again. Repeat the procedure 4 times, having the partner record all data. After relaxing for the 5th time, your partner will tap the pencil 5 times as usual. Now, instead of getting up for your exercise, only check your pulse. If the conditioning was successful, your pulse rate will rise even without engaging in exercise.
Okay, so here's another way of looking at it. My dog has conditioned me. When I let my dog outside, when he's done with his business, he comes back to the door and I let him in, and then he runs around in a circle right in front of me until I give him a treat, right? So my initial response was, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And he would keep doing it, and then I would give him a treat. And so he's conditioned my response, right? Initially, he came in and I don't know what he thought he was doing, but he realized that if he does that, he gets a treat. He doesn't do it anywhere else. It's only specific to that when I let him in from being outside, but he's conditioned my response. So conditioning is a lot when we talk about it based on the situation, the response, and then the various stimuli. Okay, it's confusing, but we'll work through how it applies to young children. Okay, so when we talk about conditioning, operant conditioning, we're talking about reinforcers, positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. A reinforcer, just a reinforcer, neither positive nor negative, is something that increases the probability of a response. You can have a positive reinforcement that increases the probability that the behavior will occur again by presenting a consequence, or negative reinforcement, which increases the probability that a behavior will occur again by removing the stimulus or aversive stimulus. So a negative reinforcement is, we want you to put your seatbelt on when you drive in a car. So what we will do is we will have an alarm go off when you get in the car and you don't put your seatbelt on. When you put the seatbelt on, the negative or undesirable stimulus goes away. That's negative reinforcement. A positive reinforcement would be, we want you to wear your seatbelt. So when you get in the car and you put your seatbelt on, candy appears or something like that. That would be a positive reinforcement. Both reinforce the behavior, they just do it in different ways. Punishment is consequences that reduce the probability of a behavior. This is talking about punishment in a different way than we think of, like timeouts or spanking. This can be that, but it's a broader definition than that, and we'll talk about that. Shaping is reinforcement of successive approximations to a target behavior. This is doing a thing repeatedly to make the thing happen. So repeatedly doing the alarm in the car. And actually, by shaping, what you could do is, after a certain amount of time, that alarm may go away because you've been conditioned to respond in this way. You've been shaped. And then extinction is stopping reinforcement, can result in a decline in response. So if you stop that negative reinforcement, it may mean that if I don't have that alarm going off, I'll forget to put my seatbelt on. Okay. All right. This is very confusing, but it all makes sense when we work with children, and we'll talk about it in ways that make more sense in a minute. B.F. Skinner was a psychologist who believed that you can use science to predict and control behavior. He was a behaviorist, and he advocated for eliminating punitive forms of control and using only positive reinforcement to change behavior. One of the things that he had was a Skinner box, where he put rats in boxes where they didn't have outside influences, and he gave them the ability to feed themselves if they pushed on this button, and he studied behavior that way. Piaget also is influenced by behaviorism and conditioning, but in a little different way. There's a cognitive development theory which understands how children learn things. Assimilation is a word he used. It means you're incorporating a new perception into what you already know. The scheme or schema is what you already understand. Accommodation is revising what you understand so that a new experience makes sense. And then equilibrium is when you finally realize that what you know makes sense.
A schema is a generalization of past experiences that forms a scripted pattern of thought. For example, we all have a specific process in mind when we think about going to a restaurant. Some imagine standing in line, placing an order and eating, and then throwing the trash away. Others imagine being seated, then ordering, sharing everything, and then paying, leaving a generous tip. We can think of a schema as a mental framework in the form of a kid's toy. Things we already fully understand, say a triangle, get into our brain without a problem. When new information is similar to what we know, say a square, it can enter the brain through assimilation. For completely new information, here a star, this doesn't work. Then we need accommodation and to change the schema itself. Assimilation is the cognitive process of making new information fit in with your existing understanding of the world. It works if new information is close to what we already know. To process the new information, we make it fit into our existing schemas. We have to use accommodation if things are so unique that they don't fit into our existing schema. In other words, to understand something truly new, we first have to remodel our brain space. Just imagine you were born completely colorblind. Not a million books or the best teacher could ever truly explain red to you. You need to experience it to accommodate the idea. Frederick Bartlett demonstrated how schema unconsciously alter our perception and memory in what became known as the War of the Ghosts experiment. He did that by reading to his British students a strange Native American folktale from the Chinook tribe. The story involved ghosts, hunting seals, going to war, and canoeing. Later, he monitored how the students recalled what they remembered from the story, first days, then weeks, and then months after. 3 striking things happened. 1. Omission of unfamiliar details. Multiple students did not recall a part about the Chinooks going hunting seals. This happens because hunting seals does not naturally fit into the cultural context of rich British students. In other words, they do not have an existing schema for this kind of information. Therefore, they have a hard time understanding it and hence can't move it into their long-term memory for later recall. And so they forget. Bartlett argued that psychologically, we conceive anything that doesn't fit our schema as irrelevant. 2. Familiarization of things strange. Some of the students that initially did remember the part about hunting seals later recalled the activity as going fishing. A canoe that was loaded with weapons was remembered as a rowboat. This happens because when we lack the words to describe new, unique experiences, we use idioms or figures of speech. In other words, we channel unfamiliar information through the framework of a familiar schema. And because we do that every time we recall that unique experience, over time it becomes more familiar and less authentic. 3. Rationalization of the illogical. Right after it was told, most students thought that the tale was strange. A few weeks later, however, it suddenly made a lot of sense to some of them. The students began to add terms such as therefore and because, and unconsciously made the story casual and logically coherent. Whenever they retrieved it from memory, they added a reason. The Chinooks didn't go hunting seals or to war on their canoes. They took the boats because they wanted to go fishing. Bartlett noted that each time the students were asked to recall the story, it had changed a bit, which means that long-term memories are neither fixed nor immutable, but are constantly being adjusted. This supports the existentialist view that people construct the past in a constant process of adjustment. In other words, much of what we remember is rationalized into a self-narrative that allows us to think of our life as a coherent string of events. Jean Piaget, who coined the term, argued that we construct our experiences into schemata so we can make sense of the world.
Okay, so what this means is that young children, as they are having experiences and learning about the world around them, they are incorporating this into their schema, what they know, and this is constructing their knowledge, constructing their development. So here's a way that you can think about how this applies to young children. I'm going to talk about my dog again. My dog's name is Harry. So if my children had grown up in a house where there was only one dog and his name was Harry, their experience, their schema of dogs is Harry, right? So they know Harry. We don't go around calling our dog dog. We call our dog Harry because that's his name. So when they go out in the world, they may see another dog, or they may see another four-legged furry creature and call it a Harry because that's their schema. A four-legged furry creature is a Harry. So then we say to them, oh no, that's a dog. Harry is a dog and that's a dog, right? And so then they accommodate this new information into their schema, and that helps them know, oh, now I know what a dog is. Okay. Now, sometimes you might have a kid who knows dogs and assigns that to all furry four-legged creatures as cat. And then you have to tell them, oh, this is a cat, and they accommodate that new thing. And as they are accommodating this and understanding it, when they get to the part where it makes sense to them, that's equilibrium. And that's what we're all striving for, is some understanding of our own thinking. So Piaget also talked about stages of development. And the one that we talk about a lot in early childhood is the sensory motor stage, which is birth to 2 or 3, depending on what textbook you're looking at. And what that is when you are learning things through the experience of touching, tasting, feeling, moving around, because you're not learning things by talking to people about them, right? So when infants are born, they are in the sensory motor stage, and they're in the sensory motor stage generally through the time when they learn to use language effectively and consistently. So one of the things that is a hallmark of the sensory motor stage is that children begin to develop object permanence. Object permanence is the idea that if you can't see something, it still exists. So we're going to watch this quick little video, I think it's pretty short, about object permanence.
What do you have there? Is that your yummy giraffe? Oh, go. Oh. There's that giraffe. Good.
And what's fascinating is that baby thinks once that giraffe is under the blue felt, it's gone. Like that giraffe does not exist anymore. And so this is why it's important. One of the ways that we practice with children object permanence is peekaboo, right? So this is actually practicing for them to develop a developmental skill. Peekaboo, here I am, now I'm not, here I am, right? And this is also really important for attachment, which we'll talk about next time. So the next step in developing object permanence is that baby will realize that the giraffe is gone and maybe understand that the giraffe is under the blue blanket, but won't look in the right place for it. So that's the A, not B error. And that's starting the object permanence, developing that sense of object permanence. Symbolic thought, ability to have one thing stand for another, and deferred imitation, remember and then imitate an action from the past. These are skills that they're developing as they go through this sensory motor stage. And then we have the information processing model, which is really about your memory and how your brain stores information, right? We think infants have some long-term memory, but we can't really tell. So much of memory is based on being able to talk about it. So it's hard to have memories from before you have language to assign to them. You may have memories, but you don't know how to share that and how to talk about it. So the average age of first memory is 3 to 4 years, which makes sense because that's about the time that they understand the world around them, that they're not just they are the world, and that they have words to put to the memories. So I'm fascinated by that idea that, like, are there memories before you have language? I don't know how that works. Okay. Reasoning and problem solving. Reasoning is goal-directed, involves inference. You have to make some assumptions about things, and you need those important skills like critical thinking and problem solving. And problem solving is a type of reasoning. We talk about how babies and young children are constantly doing experiments, and that's what they're doing. As they go through life, they are, when you see that block shape sorter, they're trying to get the square peg into the round hole, trying and trying and trying, because they're literally doing scientific experiments. It doesn't seem like that's what it is, but if I try this and finally I'll give up, and then I'll try the round one, and the round one works. So now I know that that works. So maybe if I flip it over and I find a side that has a shape that matches this shape, I can put it in there. Now, at toddler stage, they're not thinking about it that way, but they are still conducting that experiment. So, and then in infancy and toddlerhood, there are beginning to think about how things work in the world and how to understand things. They begin to a certain extent to learn cause and effect. If I do this thing, especially in toddlerhood, if I do this thing, mommy will come. If I yell mommy, mommy will come. Or if I throw, whatever, this will happen. It's interesting to watch children, especially toddlers, develop that sense of cause and effect. And then induction is being able to use information from your own experiences in new situations. So it's being able to know that this furry four-legged thing is a dog. And then when I see one in another place, it is also a dog. Okay. Trial and error. So when you hand a spoon to a 9-month-old with the wrong orientation, so you're not handing it to, I don't have a spoon in my office, but you're handing it to them backwards, right? With the bowl part out. They will put the wrong end in their mouths before they realize they need a different strategy. 14-month-olds will put it halfway up to their mouth and go, oh, that's not right, and turn it. And 19-month-olds will turn it before they get it to their mouth. So think about that. In 10 months, how much cognitive development is happening that they know that they have to think, okay, this is how a spoon works. That spoon's not facing the right way. I'm going to use my motor skills to turn that spoon the right way, right? So there's a lot of like heavy duty thinking going on there. Then the strategies that they may use that include turning the spoon around before picking it up, right? So if it's facing the wrong way, they might turn it on the table or whatever, grabbing it with the other hand and then, turning it that way. A lot of stuff. It would be interesting. I wish I had some video of infants trying this. Renee Bayerjan is a researcher at the University of Illinois, right here in Champaign-Urbana. And she has done studies throughout the years with all kinds of infants and toddlers on a variety of things. And we're going to watch a little video here of how she studies with infants and toddlers, because I think it's interesting to see the research in person. My children both took part in this research when they were babies. And it was a really weird thing because you would sit, a lot of her research is based on how long a child watches something. And so I would sit there with my toddler on my lap, and I would have to wear dark glasses so I couldn't see what was going on. And I couldn't respond to my toddler to see what they were doing. So we'll watch just a bit of this.
At the
This is
University
old.
of Illinois, a team of researchers is now using ingenious experiments to discover previously unsuspected abilities of newborns and young children. Professor Renee Bayerjan studies how babies develop the concept of object permanence.
By object permanence, we mean really a set of beliefs about objects. The first and most fundamental belief is that objects continue to exist when hidden. The first person to investigate the development of object permanence beliefs in infants was Jean Piaget, the famous Swiss psychologist. And he claimed that it's not until approximately 8 to 9 months of age that infants understand that objects continue to exist when hidden, and that it's not until approximately 12 months of age that babies begin to understand that objects not only exist but retain their physical and spatial properties when hidden. What we've done is to devise a series of tasks where the infant simply had to look at possible and impossible events.
In this experiment, a 6-month-old baby watches a cart rolling down tracks, going behind a screen and coming out the other side. The screen is lifted to show a block sitting behind the tracks. Next, the baby sees the block placed on top of the tracks. The screen comes down, the cart rolls exactly as before. But in the real world of permanent objects, the block should have stopped the cart. The baby stares longer at this apparently impossible event.
When infants are surprised or puzzled by an event, they tend to look at it longer. So our prediction is always that if infants perceive the events as we do, then they will look longer at the impossible or magical event than at the possible event. And what we found is that infants as young as 3.5 months of age, and perhaps younger, but certainly as young as 3.5 months of age, understand that objects continue to exist when hidden. One contribution of this research is to say that we must really take a very close look at infants' physical knowledge. It's much richer, much more sophisticated than used to be thought.
Okay, so that's how some of her research is done, and that's how we learn what babies know and understand. Habituation is a reduction in attention to repeatedly presented or continuously available stimuli. Habituation. Let's talk about habituation as it relates to teachers' voices. When children constantly hear their names being called or constantly hear teachers saying quiet, 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 they become sort of immune to that. Habituation is you're not paying as much attention to the stimuli because it's being presented over and over again. When stimulus changes, dishabituation often occurs, in which infants increase their looking time. So when that block was put on the tracks, that was dishabituation, and the child increases looking time. Core knowledge is innate ideas or concepts and principles that are genetically pre-programmed in the brain. And nativists believe the only role environment plays in core knowledge is to provide some minimal experience to trigger innate ideas. Nativists believe that things happen just because of whatever. And occasionally the environment will change the way you think about something. What do infants know? What we know is that they kind of have a sense of size and number and amount. They have a sense of, and these are older infants, obviously, They have developed categories, like there's furniture and there's animals, there's people and there are books, you know. They understand some sequences, some cause and effect a little bit. I feel better if I have a bottle, or I feel better when mommy changes my diaper. Physical objects are solid. They cannot spontaneously appear or disappear or go through each other, and liquids are different from solids. So these are some things that we know infants know just based on our observation of their behaviors. So it's important to know that if you're working with infants, right? They know the difference between a chair and a person. So language development in infancy and toddlerhood is amazing, right? To go from 0, the day you're born, and all you can do is make some sounds, to being 3 years old and having complete conversations, making up stories, telling about what happened yesterday, using a broad vocabulary in 3 years with really no, like, nobody sits somebody down and teaches them how to talk and how to understand language. This is really experiential, right? That's amazing. It's amazing that our brains can do that. So in infancy and toddlerhood, we talk about nonverbal language. So nonverbal language is the things that children do, gestures, facial expressions, right? But it communicates. One thing, verbal language is words and speech, right? So when we think about language in infancy and toddlerhood, we're really thinking about communication, and parts of that are verbal and nonverbal language. Verbal language involves words and speech, and there's receptive and expressive. Receptive is I understand the words that I'm hearing. Expressive is I can say things to you, communicate things to you that make sense. So the words, the communication that you express is how you communicate. Receptive is I understand what is being communicated to me. And when we talk about this, we don't want to just talk about in words and voice, because there are, children do communicate in different ways. A child who is nonverbal can still communicate with expressions and sign language, and they can still receive communication, right, and understand it. So we know that infants first communicate nonverbally through emotional expression, tone of voice, and gesture. Then they combine gestures and words, ba, I want my bottle. Speech replaces gestures during the first 3 years, and we'll talk about child-directed speech. But before that, I want to talk about the first communication that infants usually have is crying, cooing, whatever, to get someone's attention, right? Once that is the first step. The next step, and a very important step, is joint gaze or joint communication. There's a variety of ways to refer to it, but it is basically when a baby catches your eye and you share communication through eyes, and then when a baby directs your attention by looking at something else. And if you've been around babies, you experience this, right? Babies are powerful. And if they want you to see something, they will catch your eye and then look at something to make you look at it, right? It's the nonverbal way of going, hey, look at this thing over there that I saw. And your response should obviously be, I'm going to look at that thing and I'm going to say, oh, baby, insert baby name here. Oh, I see the dog, or I see the ball. That's a ball. That's a red ball. Did you see that ball? Naming it, having that serve and return, that engagement with the child. These are the first steps to them being able to talk. So when I am at the grocery store and I see infants or toddlers, pre-verbal children with their parents, and the parents are talking to them, and they're doing that thing where, if you didn't have a kid with you, people would think you were crazy, but you're saying to your 8-month-old, I'm going to get some grapes. I really like grapes. Grapes are purple or green. I think I'm going to get the green grapes this time. They're sweet and sometimes crunchy, and they're a fruit, and I really like them, and they grow on a vine. Look, here are the grapes. You're narrating everything you say because that little brain is sucking that up, and that is helping that child develop their language skills. Okay. So whenever I see a parent narrating, I just want to go over and say, thank you, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And sometimes I think they're doing it just out of sheer desperation of like, I don't have anybody else to talk to, or it's been a hard day and I just need to get through it. Or sometimes it's to soothe a fussy baby, you know, oh, are you upset? Well, let's go look at the apples or whatever. Anyway, child-directed speech, which is some of what I was just talking about, also called motherese, which I'm going to take issue with that one too. Not just mothers can do motherese. Child-directed speech is exactly that speech. It is talking to children. It is saying, like I said, oh, do we need some grapes? Being expressive, lots of facial expressions, lots of ups and downs with your voice, volume changes. That's motherese. It's the way we talk to babies. It's not baby talk. I'm not a fan of baby talk. I think you should talk to children using the real words for the things that they're going to call those things when they get a little bit older. When we're making up baby words and baby sounds, we're not really helping children develop language skills. We are giving them a sense of comfort and, you know, helping them, especially as they're developing, when they're saying baba instead of bottle, because they just don't have the physical ability to say bottle yet. That's okay when you say, oh, you want your baba, you want your bottle, right? Baby talk is not, it does not help children. I'm anti-baby talk. Okay, development of language abilities. From birth to 4 months, they're hearing human voices and they prefer human voices. They prefer female voices over male voices. They recognize their mother's voice and language from the womb. Babies in the womb understand what their native language is. They can differentiate English versus Spanish, okay? And they can hear their and understand their mother's voice, especially if their mother, and you know what? They could probably understand their father's voice too. We probably haven't done research on this. Or if we have, we just don't, I don't know about it. If everybody's talking to that baby before that baby's born, they can hear it, right? And so it's important to do that and to make those communications so that then when the baby's actually born, it already has that connection. We know that cries have different sound properties and convey different meanings. There are hungry cries, there are sleepy cries, there are poopy diaper cries, right? There are I'm upset about, I'm scared cries. From 1 to 4 months, cooing begins, which means that infants are producing sounds that, you know, ooh and ah. And then babbling. Babbling starts in 3 to 8 months, and that is using vowel sounds. Ba, 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 ma, 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 are some of the first ones that they use, right? They can discriminate most sounds. They understand family names, receptive language. When you say, oh, here comes grandma, they know who you're talking about. And then around 7 to 8 months, they begin to segment individual words from stream of fluent speech. So what we don't think about is that we know what words are, but they don't know what words are. For them, it's just sounds, and then sounds have meanings, and then it becomes individual words. 9 to 10 months, receptive language for objects begins. So they understand when you're pointing at something and telling them what it is. Around this time, deaf children stop babbling because they don't have the ability to move from making those sounds into words because they can't hear what the words are around them. And then gestures are used to communicate, pointing, waving. This is around 9 to 10 months. Around 10 to 15 months, receptive language grows dramatically. And then first words emerge around 12 months. And then they lose the ability to discriminate all phonemes in foreign language. So at this point, phonemes are the smallest parts of sound in a language. At this point, they start focusing on the smallest parts of sound in their own language. So a, k, k, k. Those are phonemes. By 15 to 18 months, they can follow simple commands. There's my dog. They may produce sentence-long utterances with nonsense words expressed in meaningful tones. You've heard this one before, especially like they're pretending to be on the phone. They're la 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 la, and they're saying words with tones that are similar to what they might hear you saying on the phone. Speech occurs in hollow phrases. Instead of "I want my bottle," it's just "bottle." The 50-word milestone is reached, and word learning begins slowly at 2 words per week, with a vocabulary spurt beginning when 9 words per day are learned. So this is a high development time for language and learning. And then 18 to 24, they're beginning to work on, or they're continuing to work on what they've already been doing, but they are adding, just adding to it more sentences. They're beginning to understand how grammar works. They are saying things like thank you and hello, goodbye. But it's one big word because, again, it's just the sound. They don't understand how to break it up yet. And at this point, like my daughter was about 15 months when she put her first 2-word sentence together. We were out for lunch and we were sitting outside and she said, "Hand stuck." And we were like, "What are you talking about?" Well, her hand was stuck in the chair. So, and of course I don't remember what my second daughter's first sentence was. And then 24 to 36 months, this is 2 to 3, they are just like talking up a storm. Their vocabulary is growing exponentially, and they are learning to use of and the, and they're speaking in full sentences. So like I said, language learning is amazing. It's just astonishing that you can do this, because it's not just the cognitive part of it. It's I have to use my physical being to make these sounds, right? I have to understand what it is. I have to figure out how to respond. Then I have to make my mouth do the right things, my mouth, my throat, my diaphragm. It's crazy that babies can do this. Okay. And then, some people believe that all of this will just happen if children are left to their own devices, but there is evidence that that won't happen, that children who are not spoken to and have interaction will not develop these skills. What we know is that the best thing that you can do is talk to children, and not use baby talk, but use lots of ups and downs and gestures and dynamics, but and use big vocabulary words. It's okay, they'll get there. So, and it's not something that you can do like you can condition a child to speak, right? This is something that takes time, experience, nurture. Nature's part of it, because you have to have the brain development and the physical development, but it all goes, it all goes hand in hand. And the better engagement a child has, the better their speech will be later on. Again, it's amazing that children across the world, they all go through the same sequences. Practice and modeling is what I just said. How do individual differences in language, what do they predict? So as long as children clearly articulate words by first grade, talking a little funny at younger ages is not a concern. If it's a severe thing, if it's a severe lisp or an R issue or whatever, it's okay to have an intervention to help a child with that, because that can have implications later on for a lot of things. And toddlers who begin talking a little late will typically develop normal language abilities by 5 or 6 years of age. Toddlers who are the youngest in a family may talk later than older sibs, just because there's a lot of other people talking all the time. But it's important that we keep track of children's language development, because it's such an important part of just overall development. If you don't have language, it's hard to develop relationships with people. If you don't have language, it's hard to develop reading abilities. School becomes really hard if you have language difficulties, okay? So these are some of the things that predict individual differences, genes, genetic issues with, brain development or whatever. Physical factors, hearing ability. If you have a child who's not speaking, maybe you need to have their hearing checked. And then social cognition, joint attention. Like I said, when a child gets a baby, specifically gets your attention to something else. Parents who use unusual words, social interaction, verbal interaction, reading. We need to read more. And I will add to this, singing. Singing is a huge language development helper. Girls generally have more advanced language than boys do, up to a certain age, and girls read nonverbal cues more accurately. Socioeconomic status has some impact on language development. Low socioeconomic status children tend to have lower verbal ability than high socioeconomic status children. Again, one of the reasons that this could be is that parents are far busier in a low socioeconomic status home, working, trying to scrape things together, and don't have as much time to devote to that important engagement, serve and return with young children. And that's why it's important that those children have other opportunities like preschool, Head Start, to have those experiences. Children whose mothers didn't graduate from high school are more likely to have language delay. Again, a lot of people don't understand how important it is to talk to babies, right? Babies need to be talked to. And you don't have to talk to babies about baby stuff. You can talk to babies about anything, as long as you're paying attention and you are, delivering with their words into their brains. That is helpful. Classroom implications of language. Be responsive to children's talk. Infants, when you are changing diapers, talk about what you're doing. When you are putting things away in the classroom, talk about what you are doing. Encourage them to make sounds and elaborate on what preschoolers say. When a preschooler comes to you and tells you a story, ask questions. Say, oh, I didn't know that. Can you tell me more about that? Encourage children to talk. We spend an awful lot of time telling children to be quiet, and that is the wrong thing to do. The more talking there is, the better off everyone will be. Read to children and encourage them to read to themselves, or just to sit and look at books. They don't know how to read, but a toddler who can open a book the right way and flip through the pages is a toddler reader. An infant who can pick up a book, and chew on the pages is an infant reader. The more children have access to words and language, the better off they're going to be.